I had to do a couple takes, if I'm being completely honest, because I found myself crying in the middle of it. Hi friends, I'm Anastasia, the founder of Cool Cloth, and I'm so glad you're here today. Story time. What I wanted to do today was share one of my favorite holiday traditions with all of you. Every year on Christmas Eve when I was a kid, we would gather in the living room before we went to bed. We would leave cookies out for Santa, and my dad would read two different stories. The first was "Twas the Night Before Christmas," and the second one was a passage from a book called Act One by a playwright named Moss Hart. As a young kid, I remember watching my dad struggle to read this passage and not quite understanding why it was so difficult for him to get through. And it wasn't until later in life, reflecting on my own relationship with the people that I care about, that I understood the somewhat complex dynamics of navigating a family and love and the holidays, and how these things can all coexist together sometimes, and that it doesn't always look like what we think it's going to look like. And this story just perfectly captures that. I can almost guarantee you that I'm going to have a hard time getting through it, because it does have such a special meaning to me, and it is just such an honor to be able to share it with all of you. And I hope that whether you celebrate anything at the holidays or not, I hope that this story can release in you a feeling of gratitude for the love that you have experienced throughout your life, in whatever way that it has arrived and whatever it has looked like. It's just such a special and profound story. And I just feel really grateful that I get to share a Christmas tradition from my childhood with all of you. So here we go. This is it is part of Moss Hart's autobiography, Act One. It was the Christmas after my aunt had left the house, and since it was she who always supplied the tree and the presents for my brother and myself, this first Christmas without her was a bleak and empty one. I remember that I was more or less reconciled to it because my father had worked only spasmodically throughout the year. 2 of our rooms were vacant of boarders, and my mother was doing her marketing farther and farther away from our neighborhood. This was always a sign that we were dangerously close to rock bottom, and each time it occurred, I came to dread it more. It was one of the vicious landmarks of poverty that I had come to know well, and the one I hated the most. As the bills at our regular grocer and butcher went unpaid, and my mother dared not even be seen at the stores lest they come to the doorways and yell after her publicly, she would trudge 10 or 12 blocks to a whole new neighborhood, tell the new grocer or butcher that we had just moved in to some fictitious address around the corner, and establish credit for as long as she could. Thus, we were able to exist until my father found work again, or all the rooms were rented and she could pay our own grocer and butcher, and gradually the others. This time, however, They had all gone unpaid, and my mother was walking 20 blocks or more for a bottle of milk. Obviously, Christmas was out of the question. We were barely staying alive. On Christmas Eve, my father was very silent during the evening meal. Then he surprised and startled me by turning to me and saying, "Let's take a walk." He had never suggested such a thing before, and moreover, it was a very cold winter's night. I was even more surprised when he said, as we left the house, "Let's go down to 149th Street and Westchester Avenue." My heart leapt within me. That was the section where all the big stores were, where at Christmas time, open push carts full of toys stood packed end to end for blocks at a stretch. On other Christmas Eves, I had often gone there with my aunt, and from our tour of the cart, she had gathered what I wanted the most. My father had known this, of course, and I joyously concluded that this walk could mean only one thing. He was going to buy me a Christmas present. On the walk down, I was beside myself with delight and an inner relief. It had been a bad year for me, that year of my aunt's going, and I wanted a Christmas present terribly. Not a present merely, but a symbol, a token of some sort. I needed some sign from my father or mother that they knew what I was going through and cared for me as much as my aunt and my grandfather did. I am sure they were giving me what mute signs they could, but I did not see them. The idea that my father had managed a Christmas present for me in spite of everything filled me with a sudden peace and lightness of heart I had not known in months. We hurried on, our heads bent against the wind, to the cluster of lights ahead that was 149th Street and Westchester Avenue, and those lights seemed to me the brightest lights I had ever seen. Tugging at my father's coat, I started down the line of push carts. There were all kinds of things that I wanted, but since nothing had been said by my father about buying a present, I would merely pause before a pushcart to say, with as much control as I could muster, "Look at that chemistry set," or "There's a stamp album," or "Look at the printing press." Each time my father would pause and ask the pushcart man the price. Then, without a word, we would move on to the next pushcart. Once or twice, he would pick up a toy of some kind and look at it, and then to me, as if to suggest this might be something I might like. But I was 10 years old and a good deal beyond just a toy. My heart was set on a chemistry set or a printing press. There they were on every pushcart we stopped at, but the price was always the same. And soon I looked up and saw we were nearing the end of the line. Only 2 or 3 more pushcarts remained. My father looked up too, and I heard him jingle some coins in his pocket. In a flash, I knew it all. He'd gotten together about 75 cents to buy me a Christmas present, and he hadn't dared say so, in case there was nothing to be had for so small a sum. As I looked up at him, I saw a look of despair and disappointment in his eyes that brought me closer to him than I had ever been in my life. I wanted to throw my arms around him and say, "It doesn't matter. I understand. This is better than a chemistry set or a printing press. I love you." But instead, we stood shivering beside each other for a moment, then turned away from the last 2 pushcarts and started silently back home. I don't know why the words remained choked up within me. I didn't even take his hand on the way home, nor did he take mine. We were not on that basis, nor did I ever tell him how close to him I felt that night, that for a little while the concrete wall between father and son had crumbled away, and I knew that we were two lonely people struggling to reach each other. I came close to telling him many years later, but again, the moment passed. Again, it was Christmas, and I was on my way to visit him in Florida. My father was a bright and blooming 91 years of age now, and I arrived in Florida with my wife to spend Christmas and New Year's with him. On Christmas Eve, we sat in his living room, and while my wife chatted with his nurse and companion, I sat on a sofa across the room with my father, showing him the pictures of his two grandchildren. Suddenly, I felt his hand slip into mine. It was the first time in our lives that either of us had ever touched the other. No words were spoken, and I went right on turning the pages of the picture album, but my hand remained over his. A few years before, I might have withdrawn mine after a moment or two, but now my hand remained. Nor did I tell him what I was thinking and feeling. The moment was enough. It had taken 40 years for the gulf that separated us to close. Merry Christmas, friends. Whew. Okay, made it through the story. I had to do a couple takes, if I'm being completely honest, because I found myself crying in the middle of it. But it's just so beautifully written and captures the complexity of life that exists. The multitudes are often more noticeable during certain times of year, and it certainly doesn't mean that the love isn't there, even if it doesn't show up in exactly the ways we thought it would. That story brings back a lot of really special and beautiful memories for me, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to have shared it with all of you. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and from the bottom of my heart, thanks for being here.